There's a man sitting on a beach in paradise, and I mean actual paradise. Flowers, birds, fresh water, warm air, and there's a goddess on this island who's in love with him. She feeds him, she shares her bed with him, and she's offered him the one thing no mortal human being has ever been offered: immortality. And every single morning, this man gets up, walks down to the shore, sits on the rocks, and weeps. Not because something is wrong with the island, but because even living in paradise, his subconscious mind knows that this is not his life. So Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey just hit theaters, and everyone's just talking about the casting or how it was shot on IMAX or the stylistic choices, and millions of people are about to watch it as a war movie, an adventure epic, a monster movie. But they're all gonna miss the entire point. Because this story has survived for 2,800 years, and things don't survive that long because it's just a fun monster story. This story has survived because Homer encoded into it a map. The map of what it actually costs and what it actually takes to find your way back to who you really are. And by the end of this video, I'm gonna show you exactly how this story maps to your life. No matter where you are in your journey, whether you're an entrepreneur, a high performer, or a parent, you'll be able to see yourself clearly in it. In fact, there's a moment where the hero does something so self-sabotaging that it costs him 10 years of his life, and I'd bet money that you've done the same thing probably this month. So here's why this matters to you. The Odyssey is a story about a man named Odysseus. He's the king of a small island called Ithaca, and he gets pulled away to fight the Trojan War for 10 years. Yes, this is the one where they hid all the soldiers in a giant wooden horse, and that was actually Odysseus' idea, and it was what ended the war. But the Odyssey is actually the story of what came next, which was 10 more years of trying to sail back home to Ithaca and what happens when he finally arrives. So on the surface, yeah, that's an incredible war epic. But if you look a little deeper, what's really fascinating about it is that every part of this story actually maps to a very specific part of your journey back to yourself, the universal journey of every human on this planet. First is the war, which represents the years of performance, the years of being who you were supposed to be, the entrepreneur, the dad, the athlete, the people pleaser, the years you spent doing what you were conditioned to do in order to make a name for yourself, to be worth something, to gain love, admiration, and praise, the years the ego spent crafting an identity to keep you safe. This is who I am, this is what I do. But after every war, there's a journey home. And that's the long, treacherous road back to who you really are underneath that performance, the you who existed before you learned what to do to get applause or praise or attention. And then there's Ithaca. Ithaca isn't just a place, it's the self. It's the ultimate end goal. It's returning back to who you truly are. And you probably know this journey. When you were born into this world, you didn't need to do anything to be perfect. But at some point, you received a message that your value was conditional, that you needed to achieve something, to be something, to be known, to get people to like you, or to play small, to get out of the way, or take responsibility for other people's emotions. And at some point, you became something, an entrepreneur, a parent, an executive, a teacher, all in the name of proving your worth. And you probably weren't even aware of it at the time, but if you look back honestly, you can see the truth. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but now there's this strange ache of looking at the life you've built, a good life, maybe even an impressive life, and feeling somehow like it's not you. You're not ungrateful, nothing is technically wrong, and yet some part of you knows you're not home. And if you pay attention, the Odyssey maps every step of that journey back home, what it takes and what it looks like to finally return to your true self. And this might be one of the hardest things you've ever done, but if you're open to it, it could also be the greatest epic of your entire life. So this obviously isn't a movie review, but it's a breakdown of the map, the war, the journey, and the return home. So let's start with the thing that almost nobody notices about this story. The Odyssey isn't about the war. The 10 years of the Trojan War, the wooden horse, the battles, the most famous conflict in the ancient world, it all just exists in stories and songs. It's almost like an afterthought. The Odyssey that Odysseus goes on isn't the war. It's actually the journey home from the war. It starts after the thing that he built his entire identity around for a decade is finished, and now he's supposed to just go home. And I want you to sit with why that is. The most important part of your life isn't the years of performance, the years at war. The bigger story actually begins the day the performance ends and you start finding your way back. In fact, if we back up for a second, Odysseus didn't actually even want to go to war. He actually actively tried to avoid it. He started plowing under all of his crops so that people would think that he was insane. But then somebody put his baby in front of his plow, he swerved so that he wouldn't hit it, and then they knew that he wasn't actually insane. So at some level, he knew this war wasn't his war, that the performance that it would demand wasn't his true nature, but he went anyway because he was manipulated into it. So this might sound familiar to you because I think most of us got drafted into our performances when we were young. Somewhere early, somebody put something we loved in the path of the plow, whether it was approval or safety or belonging, and we swerved. And the swerve proved that we could play the game, so we got taken by it. We officially began the performance that would define years or decades of our life. And here's the thing about the war that's also true of your performance. Odysseus was great at it. He wasn't the strongest Greek, but he was the smartest. He was the strategist, the talker, the guy who could figure out any system and beat it. And think about what the Trojan horse actually is. 10 years of brute force couldn't crack the city of Troy. But what ended the war was an extremely clever trick. And I'm not just reciting all of this from the poem, but I'm actually sharing this from personal experience. I personally spent 10 plus years building online businesses. I made millions of dollars. I consulted 8 and 9 figure companies. I spoke on stages. I wrote a best-selling book. I found the game, I learned the rules, and I got really good at winning it. And don't get me wrong, I'm also really grateful for the performance because those skills that I gained will serve me for the rest of my life. But then a few years ago, my war ended. And it wasn't with a victory parade, but it was with a crash. My business collapsed. There was burnout, depression. I ended up in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And I know it probably sounds weird, but even after making millions of dollars, there was a week where we couldn't even afford milk. And that was when I had my first glimpse that maybe this wasn't my war. And I started to investigate what drove me to get into it in the first place. And here's what nobody tells you about that moment. The worst part wasn't losing the money. The worst part was that the performance had been my entire sense of who I was up till that point. And so when the war ended and I knew something was wrong, I knew I needed to return home, but I didn't know what to do because I didn't know who I was anymore. And that's where the Odyssey begins. At the moment you begin to realize that the thing that you've tied your entire identity to isn't serving you anymore, and it disappears. You sell your company, you hit your revenue goal, your kids leave home, or it all just comes crashing down. And you realize that you can't just simply find your true passion or your true self because after decades of performing, you have no idea where home is anymore. And not to mention, your ego doesn't even want you to go there. And that's the beginning of your journey. So from the outside, Odysseus' journey home looks like just a string of bad luck. But if you look closely, you'll notice something strange, that almost nothing out there attacks him unprovoked. Almost every disaster on this journey is actually self-inflicted, which means that the enemy was never really the sea. It was Odysseus himself. Because here's what nobody tells you about coming home to yourself. The person that you've been doesn't want you to make it. The identity that you built in the war, the performer, the winner, the name, knows that Ithaca is its death. On Ithaca, there's no war to be brilliant in. There's no audience, there's no applause. There's just you actually being you. And the old self would rather keep you at sea forever than let that happen. So every island you're about to see in this story is the same thing happening over and over again. 10 years of stops, and almost every single one of them is some version of you sabotaging the return. So the first temptation on the way home isn't actually a monster at all. So Odysseus and his men land on an island of people called the Lotus Eaters. And these people are not violent at all. In fact, they live on a flower called the lotus. And when you eat it, something very specific happens. You forget home. Not your name, not your skills, just the longing, the ache, the memory inside your body that there's somewhere that you're supposed to be going. And of course, when Odysseus' men eat it, they're not in pain anymore, so they have to be dragged back to the ships, weeping, because why would they want to face the pain of the sea again if there's nothing calling them back home? And this is where most people get trapped. The Lotus is the drinking, the busyness, the doom scrolling, the video games, the constantly being at work even after all the work is done. Everything you do to numb yourself from the ache inside you that is calling you home, to avoid it, because the Lotus is more comfortable than the sea. It feels easier to stay where you are and just pretend that everything is okay, that this is just how the world works, that you're supposed to keep doing this thing, than it is to actually confront your emotions and feel the pain that there's something missing. It's every decision you make to stay in what's familiar or comfortable instead of choosing to be more you. And here's what makes it really dangerous. It doesn't feel wrong. In fact, it feels pleasant. But the question everyone has to ask themselves is, would you rather live your life in a fog and numbness and forget there's a home to return to, or feel the full pain of not being there yet? Now we move on to one of the most consequential parts of the whole story, and this is where Odysseus does something that is so self-sabotaging that it almost hurts when you see it in yourself. So Odysseus and his men land on an island and find a massive cave full of food. And while they're in there, the owner comes home, and it's a Cyclops, a huge one-eyed giant named Polyphemus. And Polyphemus starts eating Odysseus' crew 2 at a time. So of course, there's no way they're fighting their way out of this one with brute strength, so Odysseus once again does something just like he always does, something brilliant. When the Cyclops asks him his name, Odysseus says, "I am nobody." The man whose entire identity has become his reputation, the hero, the warrior, introduces himself as no one. Then he gets the giant drunk, waits for him to pass out, and drives a sharp stake into his eye. And as the Cyclops is screaming, the other giants come running, and they shout, "Who's hurting you? Who's hurting you?" And the Cyclops screams back, "Nobody, nobody is hurting me." And the other giants simply shrug and go home. So the trick worked perfectly. And as the Cyclops is screaming, Odysseus and his men slip out of the cave, get to the ships, and they push off from shore. So now get this. Odysseus is free. He beat the unbeatable monster. And the way he beat it, I need you to see this, is by becoming nobody. By releasing the name, the reputation, the need to be known as the one who did it. The ego became nothing, and that's what got him out of the cave. And then the worst part happens. So the ships are pulling away from shore, everyone's safe, it's over, and Odysseus stands up on the deck, turns back towards the island, and he just cannot help himself. He shouts across the water at Polyphemus, "If anyone asks you who did this to you, tell them it was Odysseus, king of Ithaca." The ego just can't help but make sure the monster knows who he is, and in the process, Odysseus gives it his name and his home address. And the Cyclops raises his hands and prays to his father, who happens to be Poseidon, the god of the sea, the exact sea that Odysseus has to cross to get home. Poseidon hears the prayer, curses Odysseus, and the entire 10-year nightmare that follows, every monster, every shipwreck, every lost year, all flows from that single moment. And I want you to let that land in your body, because this is probably the most psychologically precise moment in the entire story. There are moments in your becoming when you're going to have to become nobody, when you have to release your ego's need to be seen or known for who you are and what you've done, to make the move, to do the work without needing anyone to know it. And then something inside of you just can't hold it. The ego snaps back and grabs the microphone. "I did this. I'm the one. Remember my name." And for most of us, this happens over and over and over again, because the thing that we're afraid of most is finding out that we're nobody, that we're not significant, that we're not special. The years and years of war were just a performance, and underneath all of it, there was just one child-sized question running the whole operation. Does anybody see me? The performance was just a mask, and underneath it is just you. But in that realization is where we begin to find freedom, until the ego snaps back again. And every time it does, the journey gets longer and longer. Now, the next part is where the journey gets really serious. So Odysseus learns from the goddess Circe the truth about the route home, that there isn't actually a direct route. You have to go to the Underworld first. You have to sail to the land of the dead and speak with the shades and learn what you could never gain from anyone living. And pay close attention, because I think this unveils a key part of the story, that there is no route home that bypasses the Underworld. So Odysseus goes down to the Underworld, and he meets with everything down there that he hasn't dealt with. the soldiers, the war, the lost years, the pain. And one of the most potent parts of the whole thing is when he reunites with his mother, who had died of grief while he was gone in the war. He didn't even know that she had died, and there he was meeting with her. And the saddest part is that he tries to hold her 3 times, but every time she just slips through his arms like smoke, and there's nothing he can do about it. She's gone. And that's the thing about the Underworld. There are some things that you don't get to fix. You only get to finally feel them. The grief that you've been outrunning your whole life, the mother that you couldn't hold while she was passing, and the ghost of the performance itself, admitting that it was all hollow, that it was all shallow, actually spending the time feeling the grief, the pain, the anger that you never allowed yourself to express, meeting the parts of you that were suppressed and hidden and bringing them back to the surface. But here's what nobody tells you about the Underworld. It's not actually a detour. In a way, it is the destination. It's what the whole journey was bending toward. Everything before it was a setup, and everything after it is integration. The dark night of the soul, the void, it's not an interruption to your becoming, it is your becoming. It's the rite of passage that finally allows you home. So after Odysseus goes through the Underworld, now we're back at the beach. Odysseus weeping on the shore in paradise, and that's the last stop before he gets home. And Odysseus spends 7 years here on Calypso's island. And I want you to notice what this temptation is, because it's probably the most sophisticated one in the whole story. The thing that Calypso offers him is a genuinely good life. Beauty, love, safety, immortality, everything the ego has ever asked for. He's living a dream, and yet every morning he walks to the shore and weeps. Because the wrong life is still the wrong life, even when it's beautiful. Even when it seems like you have everything. Even when everyone says that you'd be insane to leave it behind. Even when to the rest of the world it looks like you're living the dream, there's a part of your soul that just isn't willing to negotiate. And it will just sit there weeping on the shore until you listen. And you may know this feeling because it doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's the emptiness that you can feel even though your life looks perfect on paper. Sometimes it's the wondering of, is this all there is? Sometimes it's just an aching to do something different with your life. You don't always know what it is, but you can feel something there. And you're waiting, sometimes for years or decades, to feel ready to make the final leap and fully trust yourself. And this is the part that really gets me. When the time finally comes and Odysseus is truly ready to go home, Calypso helps him build a raft, and Odysseus, for the first time in the whole story, fully submits himself to the ocean, fully surrenders to the wrath of Poseidon, fully surrenders the ego. And that's when he finally washes up on the shore of his own home. So as interesting as the war and the journey are, I really think the most impactful part of this whole story is actually what Odysseus does when he gets back to Ithaca. And here's where the story hands you probably its deepest secret, the thing the entire map has been drawing towards since the beginning. So he finally makes it, his ship is gone, his crew is dead, he has nothing, he's half naked, and he's laying on the shore of Ithaca, and he doesn't even recognize it. 20 years of fighting to get to this place, and when he finally arrives, he doesn't even know where he is. And that's not a plot hole. That's the whole point. Because home is not where you came from. Home is who you are. See, Ithaca is the self, the unique, irreplaceable person underneath the war, underneath the performance, underneath every name you ever held. And when you first arrive, you probably won't recognize it. It seems like a foreign land because you've never actually lived there as an adult. So now Odysseus shows up in his own kingdom as a washed up beggar, and it's not a tactic, it's the rule. The ego can't lead the way home. After everything, the monsters, the war, the underworld, the return happens completely stripped, unrecognized, no form or glory. Because if you're waiting to come back to yourself as somebody impressive, you're still shouting at the Cyclops. And this is the part where Odysseus breaks down. He starts hearing songs and stories being told about him, his incredible achievements as a warrior, his clever trick with the Trojan horse that finally opened up the gates of Troy and unleashed an entire army on a helpless city to destroy them all. And he begins to cry because he sees the tragedy of the entire war, the damage done by the performance that he never wanted to be a part of. This great soldier that everyone is singing songs and writing stories about, and he's actually grieving it. And so Odysseus arrives in his palace, but the palace isn't empty. And this is the part of the return that nobody warns you about. So the palace is full of suitors, 108 men who moved in while he was gone that are eating his food, drinking his wine, courting his wife, and each one trying to take his place as king. And you probably know exactly who the suitors are. They're every false identity that moved into you while you were away from yourself. The people pleaser, the achiever, the performer, the version of you built for an audience. They've been consuming your resources for years, draining you of your energy, and every single one of them is trying to marry your soul. So Penelope, Odysseus' wife, his soul, who has held the palace for 20 years, announces a test. She brings out Odysseus' great bow and says, "Whoever can string this bow, I will marry." And one by one, the strongest suitors step up, and not a single one of them can even bend it. And then the disguised beggar, Odysseus, asks for a try, and the room laughs at him. They mock him for even wanting to try. And Odysseus steps up, and he strings the bow like a musician tuning an instrument. See, the false selves can imitate almost everything about you, but they can't do the one thing that is actually yours. There is a capacity in you, a specific aliveness, a specific gift that nobody else could ever possibly replicate. When you operate from that gift, you find your greatest power. And when you show up in a room, everybody knows who just walked in. So the story is over, everything is resolved, Odysseus has retaken the throne, and he's reunited with Penelope. But it doesn't actually end there, because there's one more challenge Odysseus has to undertake that I want to end this video with, and it might just be the most important lesson in the whole story. So after Odysseus gets home, he has to do one more thing, because when he was down in the underworld, Tiresias gave Odysseus one final instruction for after the homecoming. He said, when everything is finished, you must take an oar from your ship, put it on your shoulder, and walk inland, away from the sea. And you keep walking, town after town, until you reach a people so far from the ocean that they've never seen it. Until the day a stranger stops you on the road and asks you why you're carrying a winnowing fan, a farm tool. Someone who looks at the instrument of your entire epic journey and sees a piece of wood. And there, in that place, you plant the oar in the earth, and then you can finally rest. And I want you to understand what Homer is doing here, because this might be one of the deepest wisdoms in all of ancient literature. There's one last trap after the return. After you've done the work, the descent, the grief, the awakening, there's a nearly irresistible temptation to make the journey itself your new identity, to become the hero of your own transformation, to plant a flag in your suffering and your growth and say, this is who I am now. I'm the one who went through it. And I'll be honest with you, I'm feeling this pull right now just making this video for you, because on some level, I think my ego probably wants you to see what I've learned and what I've experienced. But the performance of depth is still a performance. The ego is more than happy to dress up as the one who finally made it home. But that too is not Ithaca. So the oar has to be carried to a place where it doesn't impress anyone, where nobody knows about the Cyclops or the Sirens or the Underworld, where your whole epic is just a piece of wood, and you plant it there, not as a monument, but as a release. Releasing the journey itself as another story that you tell about yourself, and letting it just be the life that you got to live. And notice, at the end of the story, Odysseus doesn't defeat Poseidon. There's no final epic battle with the sea. He makes peace with it. He honors the very force that was opposing him the whole way, because the opposition was never the enemy. The thing that made the journey hard is the thing that made it real. So here's where I'll leave you. You are somewhere on this map right now. Maybe you're still at Troy, winning a war that was never yours. Maybe you're on the Lotus Island, just numbing so you don't feel your pain. Maybe you're lost in the underworld, confronting your garbage, and it looks like failure on the outside. Or maybe you're on the shore of a beautiful, wrong life, crying and not knowing why. But I want you to know that you're not a failure for not being home yet. You're winning because you're on the journey. No matter where you are, you're right where you need to be, and nothing has to change. See, the Odyssey doesn't promise that the journey will be short. It just promises one thing, that Ithaca exists. That underneath every performance, there is a self that has been holding the field open for you the entire time. And when you finally walk in, stripped, unrecognized, 20 years late, and you string the bow, that's when you know you're home.